Thanks, Gina. Hi, everyone. My name is Brian Vitruba. I am the European Studies and Digital Scholarship Librarian at the University of Minnesota, and I'm a member of the DSS Professional Development Committee. And I'll be the your technical moderator for the session. So, and as Gina said, everyone is muted, and we hope that except for presenters or if we're able to take questions at the end via audio, that you'll keep yourself muted. So each presenter is going to have 15 minutes, and we're going to do the questions and answers at the end of the entire, all three presentations. So, but as presenters are going through their slides and giving us their talk, feel free to pose questions in the chat box. So as Gina said, the session is being recorded, and all registrants will get a URL of the recording in a few days. So I'm gonna turn it over now to my fellow committee member, Teresa Burris, who is the science librarian at the University of South Florida.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Brian.
Whoops.
Sorry. I want to tell everybody thank you for choosing to spend the next hour with us at our Spring 2020 virtual program. The program was developed by our Professional Development Committee in collaboration with the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Committee, as well as the Outreach Committee. So thank you very much to all of our presenters, our committee members, and Max Prudhomme, who chairs the committee and coordinated this effort. In the spirit of encouraging equity, diversity, and inclusion in the DSS community and beyond, I'm going to read a brief statement. Please take a moment to review the guidelines on this slide. We, the DSS community, agree to frame interactions in DSS activities with these guidelines in mind. We recognize that whenever we engage as a community, we will all make mistakes, and that may unintentionally harm individuals or groups. But we take responsibility for the results of our words and actions. We expect that all DSS meetings will begin with a brief review of these agreements so they may become standard for activities throughout the section. In a happy coincidence, this program also models safe social distancing practices. Next, I'm going to go ahead and introduce all of the speakers at once at the outset. So on the next slide, it will show all of the panel presenters and program titles. The programs were chosen with an eye toward providing a variety of perspectives with regard to type of institutions. We have both large public and small private liberal arts institutions. We're representing a variety of geographies, and also a variety of programming aimed toward graduate students, undergraduate students, emphasis on digital collections, digital skills, digital tools, etc. Our first group of presenters will be research data librarian Stacy Winchester and scholarly communications librarian Amy Freeman, and they will discuss the development, implementation, and assessment of a 2-day workshop on data scholarship skills for graduate students, and they will then offer some data-driven programming recommendations for the audience. Our second presenter will be Digital Library Manager Kent Gerber, and he will share how he has employed primary sources from a variety of special collections to integrate the perspectives of people of color and indigenous peoples into digital humanities curriculum designed to engage primarily white undergraduate students. Our third presentation will be an opportunity to get a meta look. So we're going to zoom back out to discuss digital scholarship pedagogy. And Public Services Assistant Hannah Pierce and Digital Scholarship Head Lydia Zigintseva will discuss their findings after analyzing data from a variety of digitally inflected workshops instructing more than 232 individuals. So I hope that you all enjoy all of the presentations and come up with good questions for our discussion afterwards. And now I'll turn the microphone over to our first presenters. So welcome Stacy and Amy from University of South Carolina.
Thank you so much. All right, guys. Hello, and thanks for being here with us today. My name is Stacy Winchester, and this morning my colleague Amy Freeman and I are happy to be here to discuss Sharp Grads, the Skills, Habits, and Research Program for graduate school, students rather, a two-day workshop series that we developed to provide instruction for graduate students in digital scholarship skills and competencies. Next slide, please. We're not going to spend a lot of time covering background, but just to give you a little bit of context, this program took place at the University of South Carolina, an R1 research institution in Columbia, South Carolina, with 21,000 undergraduate and 8,000 graduate students. So in early 2019, our library formed a new department called Digital Research Services, whose charge is expanding support for scholarly communications, data services, and other digital scholarship. The department began with 3 current librarians, all coming from different areas of the library, and a short time later, we added a 4th librarian to support GIS and information visualization. Next slide.
So to really understand the needs of our campus, we we conducted focus, held a whole lot of conversations across U of SC. From all of this early outreach, we learned pretty quickly that graduate students needed research skills like data management, data visualization, digital projects, and text mining, but that they weren't necessarily learning these skills during the course of their studies or from their faculty advisors. It seemed like it would be a logical step for our department to offer training skills during the course of their studies or from their outside of, hang on one second. It seemed logical that our department could offer training for these skills outside the course of their regular curriculum. As a new department, we really wanted to understand how other institutions have supported these services. So of course, we turned to the literature. As I'm sure you all know, there have been a lot of publications written on creating and providing workshops and trainings for students. So we chose to concentrate more on those that seemed appropriate in offering the skills that all of those patrons we talked to mentioned in our outreach. Of course, we found plenty of practical advice, both on what to do and on what not to do when offering our own graduate trainings for students. 2 articles that we reviewed, one by librarians at Cornell and the other from Virginia Commonwealth University, discuss the benefits of hosting a multiple or a full-day workshop over shot sessions. They both saw increased, and they found that the students that they worked with were better able to understand that research process. 2 more librarians at Kennesaw State and the University of Vermont both focused on filling curriculum gaps in graduate student education by offering skills-based sessions with lots of hands-on practice. And then finally, there was a recent study from Lawrence and Rempel at Oregon State that examined 5 years of registration data. And they found that skills-based workshops received higher registration rates than theory-based workshops. So with all of these studies, we felt like we were ready to move on to the next step and host a small pilot research skills bootcamp. Feedback from this very small summer session was positive, so we decided that we were ready to create a more regularly scheduled program. In just a moment, we're going to discuss the logistics of program planning and implementation, but first I want to take a closer look at the steps that we actually took to get an understanding of those knowledge levels and expectations of the attendees that we hope to have. So what we did was we developed a pre-assessment survey that we sent out to students before the start of the event. And in this survey, we requested information on student disciplines and at what points they were in their graduate programs. And then we also shared a list with thorough descriptions of all the sessions that we plan to offer. And we asked them to note their knowledge levels. with all of this information, we hope that we could tailor our sessions to closely meet our students' needs and expectations. So based on these different forms of outreach and assessment, we felt like we had a pretty good understanding of what types of digital scholarship skills the university's grad students needed, and we were ready to go ahead and get started.
So because we hope this talk is going to be useful for other librarians who want to plan similar programming for graduate students, a little bit of time to talk about some of the aspects of planning. So for timing, we decided on the last 2 days of the fall semester finals after classes had ended but before graduation. And we selected this time because it was hoped that graduate students would be mostly done giving and taking exams and grading because they would need to be able to come to the library to attend. As far as content goes, we included some content that we already knew they'd be interested in, such as data management, data visualization, text mining, and scholarly communication topics. But we also wanted a disciplinary component, so we reached out to our research and instruction department, where our liaisons program is housed. And we chose 4 very broad disciplines: social sciences, hard and applied sciences, humanities, and health sciences, and asked a representative liaison librarian from each general area to offer a session. And together they decided to each offer a session on literature reviews in those areas. And it is acknowledged that these generalized disciplines are kind of too general, but we hoped it would be a reasonable starting point. So in order to fit all the content we wanted into 2 days, we organized the program into breakout sessions with students choosing between 2 sessions each hour. We set it up in a way that we hoped it wouldn't be too hard of a choice. So for example, we didn't put our hard sciences and health sciences lit review sessions at the same time because many of our students might have trouble choosing between the 2 because their research is multidisciplinary. So for branding, after we chose a name for our program, we created a simple logo, which was actually pictured on the first slide of this presentation, and I created a certificate of achievement. It was decided that students attending 4 or more possible breakout sessions, which was a simple majority of those offered, would receive the certificate. I worked with our Office of Continuing Education to make sure that the certificate met university guidelines, and then I got our dean to sign it. We collaborated with the graduate school for promotion of the program through the graduate student listserv and their social media. And we also prepared other avenues for promotion, such as the library's communication department, but it was actually totally unnecessary because one mass email from the graduate school filled the program within 1 hour. We started a waiting list and then had to turn it off after 1 day because we had space for 50 students and we had 146 total registrations. So this obviously turned out to be a really valuable collaboration. So obviously we had a lengthy waiting list, which we managed pretty diligently. We sent out emails about once per week leading up to the program with information about Sharp grads, and that's how we sent our pre-assessment survey out that Amy mentioned. And we also appealed to our registered students' good nature by asking them to let us know if they were no longer going to be able to attend because we could move one of their peers over to the registered student list and take them off of the waiting list. And this worked out pretty well. So that's obviously really bare bones of our planning process. But with the planning complete, we held what we considered to be a pretty successful 2-day program. Next slide, please.
Great, so with that program behind us, we were ready to really dive in and understand what did and did not go so well with our program. Having this really full breakdown of whether the program met the expectations of students, along with more detailed analyses of what the most and the least effective sessions were, we hoped would help us to plan future programming. And of course, we also postulated that this data and our findings might be of interest to other librarians, like you, who could be considering delivering digital scholarship workshops to graduate students. So with all that in mind, we formulated a survey that we aligned pretty closely with the pre-assessment. While it was disappointing to us that only 18 out of the 42 attendees completed the survey, we weren't surprised because it was administered over the winter holiday. So like in the pre-assessment, we requested the students' disciplines and how far that they had progressed into their programs before moving on to student feedback. So the first assessment point of interest to us was the students' overall response to the full program. including whether they thought that that program would be useful during their degree programs or their future careers. So we provided a series of statements for which students were asked to provide the extent to which they agreed or disagreed using a Likert scale. These questions about the overall quality of Sharp grads resulted in generally favorable. When we asked whether the session descriptions were aligned with the content, about 83% strongly agreed. And then again, 83% also agreed or strongly agreed that the content would actually be useful for performing research during their graduate programs. And then once again, magic number, 83% agreed or strongly agreed that the program content would be useful in their future careers. Happily for us, 90% of the students agreed or strongly agreed that the instructors were knowledgeable. However, when we asked them if the program lived up to their expectations, only about 60% agreed or strongly agreed. So again, this result was a little bit disappointing to us, but it was very enlightening and is certainly going to help us to inform future iterations of the program.
We had some feedback and lots of attendance data that we used to assess our sessions. From attendance taken in the classroom, we learned that the most well-attended session was one called Introduction to Open Science Framework, followed by Introduction to Text Mining and Topic Modeling. And the two least attended sessions were two of the discipline-specific lit review workshops at the end of day 2, but it's likely that that had a lot more to do with timing than with the quality of the sessions, which of course was very high. So of course, there were several factors that influenced attendance beyond the perceived usefulness of the session. Because we use breakout sessions, high attendance rates in one session would inevitably lead to lower attendance rates in a corresponding session. And both of the highest attended workshops happened to be early in the first day. That was definitely a trend because attendance started out very high at the beginning of the first day and decreased from there. And unfortunately, day 2 was very negatively, the attendance was negatively affected because of severe thunderstorms, which was a real bummer. They made travel very difficult. Next slide, please. And finally, we looked at overall program attendance to help shape realistic future expectations for the program. So total registration for Sharp grads was finalized at 80 students. And you might remember that I said we had space for 50. The registered versus waiting list cutoff was set at 80 because the graduate school at the University of South Carolina told us to expect 50% of our students to show up. They told us this based on years of experience with graduate students and free programming, and indeed, 42 or a little over 50% of our registered students attended at least one workshop session. And we anticipated that some students would come and go as their schedules and interest levels allowed, but of the 42 Sharp grads participants, 34 of them, or 81%, attended 4 or more workshops, which allowed them to obtain that certificate of completion. So having this level of understanding about realistic expectation rates is going to help us going forward with program planning logistics such as room reservations and catering in the future. Next slide, please.
So we also wanted to know how overall satisfaction with Sharp grads correlated with the progress that the student had made towards degree completion. So for example, were they just beginning, were they middle of their program, or were they at the end of their graduate programs? And we wanted to know how the overall satisfaction aligned with disciplines of study. So to figure out this information, what we did was assign scores of 0 to 4 to each of the survey answer selections. We looked at the survey prompt, the program lived up to my expectations, and the answer choices with assigned numerical values were strongly disagree with 0, disagree somewhat 1, neutral 2, agree 3, and strongly agree 4. So we tallied and we averaged those answer selections for each of the variables. So to determine if there was a correlation between how far along the students were in their graduate programs and whether the Sharp grads program met their expectations, we looked at the average scores that were associated with each of the program progress points. Students who were classified as just beginning in their program averaged a 3.16 score. And these students agreed that the program lived up to their expectations. Students who'd identified as mid-program averaged a 2.37 score, and they were more neutral in their response. So they neither agreed nor disagreed that the program lived up to their expectations. And then finally, students who reported that they were nearing completion of their graduate program averaged a lower score of 2.25, once again showing neutrality in their response. So while based on a small sample size, less than half the attendees, This data does point to a correlation between progress made towards graduate degree completion and satisfaction with the Sharp Grads program. We found that the nearer students were towards the beginning of their graduate programs, the more they agreed that Sharp Grads met their expectations. And we were also interested in whether attendees in certain fields of study were more likely to agree that their expectations were met. It was difficult to categorize many of the attending students by discipline, but because of the structure of UFSC and because scholarship is so cross-disciplinary in nature, we decided to group the students into two very broad categories. That first category was composed of sciences and health sciences majors, and then the second was made up of humanities and social sciences majors. Sciences and health sciences majors reported an average score of 2.1, which closely corresponds with a feeling of neutrality in response to the statement, "This program lived up to my expectations." But interestingly, humanities and social sciences students reported a much higher score of 3.25, and these students agreed that their expectations were met.
All right, so our time's about up, but there are a couple of key takeaways that we learned. You know, of course, we always want to collaborate when we can with others on campus. Do remember that graduate students do not have a lot of time. So if you want to do programming for graduate students, it's important to kind of meet them where they are with regards to that. Catch them early in their program of study. Prioritize skills over theory. And we do have another slide where we have some further readings that you guys can look at later if you're interested in learning more. Thank you so much.
Okay, should I get started, Brian?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. All right, hello everyone. Glad to be here. I'm honored and humbled to have this opportunity to present today on some of the digital scholarship and diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts at Bethel. For brevity going forward, I'm going to use DEI for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So first of all, Sophia Noble's Algorithms of Oppression is a great model for me of combined digital scholarship and DEI. And it really demonstrates the importance of understanding technical systems and critical inquiry together. I also appreciated last year's virtual discussion of this book hosted by Kristen Mapes and Heather James from the DEI groups from digital scholarship sections and the rare books and manuscript sections. We're all better off when the harmful distortions of Black women in Google results or any other system are confronted and corrected. So in direct relation to our profession too, April Hathcock's work is an important critique of the systemic issues in librarianship and its whiteness. So even a current example developing right now is the combination of digital scholarship and DEI as it's the issues of representation, visibility, and agency that are matters of life and death for some in the pandemic. So articles from Ibram Kendi, data projects like the COVID tracking project, and graphics from Mona Chalabi are some examples of how COVID-19 is disproportionately impacting communities of color right now. So how can we gauge these combinations in a place like Bethel? So this presentation is going to focus on the processes of personal and professional relationships and resources that enable this at the scale of a mid-sized liberal arts university. There's a lot of great resources out there, but I want to highlight a few that have been the most helpful to me and relevant to this topic. So for instance, Brene Brown's Daring Greatly and her other works encouraged me to grow by taking risks. Robin DiAngelo's White Fragility and Beverly Tatum's Why Are All the Black Kids Sitting in the Cafeteria helped me to better understand aspects of whiteness, racial identity, and how to engage these conversations with resilience, particularly in the context of education. So we all have personal and social identities that influence how we see ourselves and others. I want to start by acknowledging the aspects of my identity that form my perspective. And they're illustrated by this tool was provided by Melissa Prescott from St. Cloud State in her Anti-Racist Pedagogy for Librarians workshop. These identities that I have, like being white, straight, Christian, middle class, and male, place me in a social context with privileges, blind spots, and vulnerabilities. So having an awareness of those ground me in order to have difficult conversations. I found this book in particular to be an invaluable guide on how to recognize and navigate those difficult conversations personally and in the workplace. And it provides tools to recognize how identities might be involved in these conflicts and tensions in the conversation. So professionally, I've been working in libraries for a total of 15 years. My first few were as a paraprofessional at the Enoch Pratt Free Library in Baltimore. And I've been in my current role managing Bethel's digital collections for 11 years. So one of the principles that keeps me focused as a librarian, even in times of all this rapid change, is David Lankes's mission of librarians. And just a quote, to improve society through facilitating knowledge creation in their communities. I like how it connects the community we serve with the broader society. And I like the part facilitating knowledge creation because it motivates me to be active and seek out opportunities to engage students and faculty in the whole research cycle. So a little bit about Bethel. We're a private faith-based liberal arts university within the Minneapolis-St. Paul metro area of Minnesota. And we're located on the homelands of the Dakota and Ojibwe people, as you can see on the map here on the right. So Bethel has an FTE of about 4,500 students, and the majority consists of about 2,300 undergraduates. So Bethel's racial demographic has changed by 10% in the last 10 years. The most current percentage of students of color is 16.7%, with an 83% student body that's white. So Bethel's a predominantly white institution. So even with that growth in the last 10 years, whiteness can still be seen as the center or the norm. And one way I can be an ally is to be intentional about informing myself of the broader issues and the lived experiences of the community of color. This includes attending events and programs of the academic and co-curricular groups having these conversations and engaging in the active listening, building personal relationships, and using the platforms I have to amplify voices. So for the rest of my talk, I'm going to feature those two specific projects that engage digital scholarship and DEI in different ways. One is a curriculum and one is a digital exhibit. So we were asked to focus on 4 aspects: collaboration, challenges and opportunities, sustainability, and best practices. And I'd say the key to all of these is to actively listen and engage others with courageous curiosity and humility. And I try. I also recognize that the power dynamic based on my identity, and I need to ensure that collaboration is truly done with people and not for them. None of these projects were done on my own, and it's due to the effort and labor of students, faculty, and staff in years of reading, listening, engaging in conversations with collaborators to get to this point. So first, I want to place both of these projects into a digital scholarship pedagogy framework, and then I'll explain the 4 aspects. From a pedagogical point of view, I like Rebecca Frost Davis's scaffolded approach to digital scholarship projects and assignments. It reflects a progression of complexity and skills from consumer to contributor to creator, and is helpful when considering what's required of students at a developmental level, and faculty too for that matter. The first project, the Digital Archives module in the Introduction to Digital Humanities course, involves the first 2 levels of consumers and contributors. I asked students to visit and analyze the Digital Public Library of America exhibit as consumers, and then participate in a crowdsourcing project from the Library of Congress as contributors. The second project, the Looking Back to Move Forward timeline, involved one of my student workers who was working on an independent project and then creating a digital exhibit based on his skill set and research interest as a creator. So the first project, the Digital Archives module, it's a 4 class period module. And students are introduced to the overall process of digitizing items, describing them with metadata, and placing them in collections and exhibits. So inspired by Melissa Prescott's workshop, I committed to highlight digital scholarship projects that are made by or feature people of color in the digital humanities curriculum. To illustrate how they all come together, I have them visit the History of Survivance Upper Midwest 19th Century Native American Narratives exhibit in the Digital Public Library of America. And it includes a majority of its material from local, like the Minnesota Digital Library sources. So in addition to the technical aspect of how the exhibit's pulled together, I also emphasize and ask them to reflect upon who's telling the narrative and make connections, between where they live and the Dakota, Anishinaabe, Ojibwe life and traditions. For instance, here, wild rice or manumin, it's a distinctive Minnesota food featured in restaurants and stores. But students might not know that it's an integral part of the continuing tribal traditions that have been in existence for thousands of years. So like this bag down here on the right is available currently from the Ojibwe tribe right now. So the second part of the module, once they've had some experience, is to contribute meaningful metadata to an existing project. We were fortunate enough to be able to work on some of Rosa Parks' papers when the crowdsourcing project was open in late February. Students needed to reflect on their experience with the technical aspects of the website, but also what they learned about Rosa Parks as a person. And my hope is that they learn to see her as more than just the woman who wouldn't give up her seat. I modeled it and shared how I learned from transcribing her calendar that she was involved in the Montgomery bus boycott by keeping track of people who she gave rides to in her calendar. So the collaboration part of this project is primarily focused on interaction with faculty besides the teaching part, and how it's based on the established trust and relationship that the library had with the history department at Bethel. We're great partners. So two innovative and energetic history faculty members invited me to join them in proposing the digital humanities major in the first place and hiring a digital humanities history faculty member. So because I had that established role in digital collections and connected with them, and also actively researched, discussed, and presented about digital humanities and digital scholarship, they were willing to invite me. The digital humanities faculty member, Charlie Goldberg, and I meet weekly to discuss the progress of any digital humanities class. So the challenges and opportunities are that I have to plan lesson plans for a 4-segment teaching session, which is definitely a privilege to have that much time, but it's still challenging to find the right proportion of technology, content, and critical inquiry. So the students are in a very formative time as first years or sophomores, and it's important to consider what I can reasonably expect from them in assignments due to their cognitive development and stages of identity. So the sustainability of this project is aided by collaboration with Charlie on a regular basis and making sure we document all the discussions and decisions. It's also important to make sure that the course content overlaps the digital library program goals, like adding content to the digital collections. So the best practices I can recommend that are more widely applicable would be to encourage you, and particularly my colleagues, my white colleagues, because people of color may have been living this for quite some time, but build on your existing skills and relationships and try to stretch yourself professionally and personally. So be prepared to engage topics of DEI and digital scholarship and include voices even outside of librarianship. I was invited just because I put myself out there and built on the management of digital collections to discuss things that faculty needed and wanted to know about. And acknowledge and approach the ones who are interested in stretching themselves too by joining book discussions in the community or invite them to events that relate to their teaching or research interest. So lastly, just stay informed of projects that highlight voices outside the dominant culture and be open to learn. The second project, the timeline exhibit, it was inspired by a challenge and a call to action. The challenge came from former Princeton archivist Jarrett M. Drake in his 2016 keynote at the Digital Library Federation Forum. He discussed how archives and liberal arts colleges can perpetuate systemic oppression and how archiving student activism on campus can counter this. The call to action came from my digital library student worker, Emmanuel Robinson. He chose to work on a project focusing on Bethel's history of discrimination. So this project represents Frost Davis's creator stage of the scaffold because Emmanuel created a new tool based on his interest. I always try to give my student workers some choice in what projects they work on based on their interest and skills, and it helps with motivation and passion. So Emmanuel wanted to investigate the topic of discrimination to establish the fact that the past and current pattern of incidents are still going on, and he wanted to invite meaningful dialogue about it. So we discussed the purpose and form of the project, and decided together that to highlight existing articles from the student newspaper collection and highlight them using Timeline.js and a custom content DM page could help him achieve the goal. So we were looking for a title and a theme when I introduced him to the concept of Sankofa, which is also used by some other Bethel programs, among many others across the country and the world. The word comes from the Akan tribe of Ghana, which means it's important to, roughly, it's important to understand the past in order to move forward into the future. The symbol of the bird is pointed forward and looking backward at the same time. He liked the philosophy, and we named the timeline the Looking Back to Move Forward timeline based on that. So first of all, I want to acknowledge that more than half of the digital collections wouldn't even exist without the careful partnership and stewardship of Professor of History and Archivist Dinah Magnuson. She's been a staunch ally and a steadfast collaborator from the beginning. Also, all of the digital collections are products of years of student work, and I'm grateful for their time and unique contributions. So in this project, the main collaboration was with my student worker, but it also required a great deal of conversation with other groups on campus like students, staff, and faculty. Choosing a critical theme like discrimination is challenging, and it helped to get advice from the community, including student groups like the United Cultures of Bethel, faculty trusted by students who engage in conversation about race, the Dean of Diversity and Intercultural Engagement, and the Chief Diversity Officer. There were many challenges and opportunities, and some early ones were decisions on what content to use and what technology will best achieve the purposes we wanted to do. Limiting it to the student newspaper and choosing Timeline.js made the project achievable in a reasonable amount of time with an interactive exhibit. Some of the material is sensitive and even hurtful, and that's challenging to be both historically accurate while framing the content appropriately. For this reason, we chose to pull out direct quotations rather than add commentary on the timeline, except for the introduction to provide context. A great opportunity is that the timeline's already stimulated conversation as an assignment in an educational equity class among faculty, and will likely be the focus of an event next year with the United Cultures of Bethel student group and the Clarion student newspaper. So it's challenging to sustain a project with students because they're only on campus a few years. So communicating with other campus collaborators really helped to mitigate that transience. And to make sure the project was sustainable, I committed digital library resources to host the exhibit and supporting content. The Timeline.js timeline is embedded into the Content DM collection as a custom page to give it a stable web location. So best practices from the project would include making space for student workers to make their own choices about projects whenever possible. They're a great source of collaboration and energy, and I really appreciate that. As before, be prepared in multiple ways with technology tools, knowledge, library expertise, and issues of race and culture within your area. Lastly, don't go it alone. And that's been key. Seek wisdom from as many sources as you can. Oh, and I see time is up. So thank you. And I have links for contact, and my script and resource list is linked in this slides as well.
Okay, is everyone able to hear me? Okay, so I'm just gonna try and share my screen. There we are. Oh, just bear with me here. Sorry, folks, it's giving me an error message.
Hannah, do you want me to?
Yes, actually, I'm getting an error message. I apologize.
Okay, let me see if I can get. I have your presentation.
Oh yes, perfect.
Is that showing up?
If you could just change it to presentation view, then we should be good. Looks like.
Just go ahead and tell me when to advance.
Yes, okay, thank you very much. And I'm sorry about the technical difficulty. So firstly, my name is Hannah Pierce, and thank you for joining. Lydia is standing by for questions later. Before I begin, I want to thank our entire DSC team, which includes Kate, Sarah-Jeanne, Mila, Peter, Jessica, Michael, Abby, Harvey, and Jeff for contributing to this in some way. Our DSC programming is very much a team effort. Next slide, please. So firstly, let me introduce you to the Digital Scholarship Center at the University of Alberta. We are an academic center that was opened in August of 2019, so we haven't yet been open a year. Our mandate is to lower barriers for those wishing to become more digitally fluent in relation to research, learning, and scholarly communication. Our team includes 3 librarians, 3 assistants, and 2 graduate students currently, all from a mix of backgrounds. Next slide. So in terms of a facility, we have 8,000 square feet of space on the 2nd floor of one of our central libraries, Cameron Library, on the main University of Alberta campus. Our facility includes a visualization lab, multi-purpose room, 3 collaboration rooms, a recording booth, a makerspace, VR studio, and high performance computing area. In terms of mandate, our mandate is to provide space for collaboration and experimentation with technology, to develop and deliver programming to the university community, which I'm going to speak about more in a moment, and to foster a community of learners and researchers, and to create an atmosphere of innovation and experimentation. Next slide. So to elaborate on our pedagogical mandate, we have a mandate to develop programming that exposes students to technology and research possibilities. Ideally, the program is intended to be free and open to the university community. It should be intended to be approachable to all levels and learners. And in some cases, it needs to provide safety and policy information to the users of the center for legal purposes, such as in our makerspace. The focus of our pedagogy is grad students and faculty, but undergraduates are permitted to participate in our workshops. Next slide. So some of the challenges that come with this mandate, I'll elaborate on those if you move to the next slide. The come-as-you-are approach to teaching technology in a research environment has its problems. It's logistically difficult, if not impossible, to cater to everyone's person's level of understanding. Some people are coming from these topics first time, some have experienced them and just want to learn more, and some are fluent and they just want a tool. Another challenge is managing user expectations. Some users, for example, faculty, are looking for services that will just do the tech for them or do the digital work for them. And so managing expectations can be a challenge. And then some users aren't entirely sure what they want, and the lack of direction and need shepherding towards the technology and perhaps the learning and study that they need to do in order to move forward with their projects. Next slide. Another challenge we find with the pedagogy is that it isn't, the DSC isn't a traditional library space. And so instead of providing information resources, we provide expertise. And our service is guidance and consultation. Our work becomes integrated with the work of the user. So there isn't a clear endpoint to our interactions as in traditional reference. And our colleagues don't always understand our work, and our work doesn't always fit the traditional idea of library instruction. Next slide. The point we're trying to get to, and one that we have learned over the course of being open, is that we're learning that it's very essential that to teach both the concept and the tool when it comes to digital literacy and digital scholarship. It's just not enough to give people a tool and teach them to use it. A good example of this is I had a consult prior to our shutdown with a student who was trying to learn in vivo. For those who don't know what in vivo is, it's software that does analysis on qualitative research data. And the student had the expectation that she would upload her survey into NVivo and that it would do the coding for her. So this put me into the position of having to sort of backtrack and shepherd the student back to her supervisor so that she could learn a little more about the methodology and understand that the tech is there to help her, but that the analysis still has to be done by a human being. Next slide. So to talk a little bit about theoretical framework and constructionism, while we do not explicitly inject theory into our work, we nevertheless aim to frame everything we do as a team in terms of the larger context of adult education and knowledge production in a colonial state. As such, our primary theoretical foundations are this idea of constructionism, a pedagogical theory that is founded in creating or making. It's a foil to the transmission model, instructionism, which is traditionally used in schools and universities. And instructionism is this idea that you attend a lecture, you take notes, you complete a test, and therefore you have learned. Next slide. Constructionism is, on the other hand, is often characterized by learning by making. But to say learning by making is an oversimplification of this framework. It's much deeper than that. It's about building knowledge structures. There are a lot of, there's a sharing component to this type of learning. When you make something, you put it out into the world and there's feedback, and it becomes an inherently social process where people give you a feedback and you adapt what it is that you've made and then and modify what it is that you've made. And so it's sort of an iterative process. A good example of this is Harvey Quammen, our academic director, teaches a computational thinking class, and he uses cubelets, which are small robotics that when connected in certain ways produce sounds and lights and move. And so students are given cubelets and tasked with making them behave in certain ways, coaxing them to learn computational process through the process of completing the activity. Our desired approach is to introduce problems, and through the resolution of those problems to introduce concepts. Next slide. We are aware that ACRL and contemporary academic libraries are striving to implement anti-oppression mechanisms. And while equity and diversity and inclusion initiatives are crucial to us at the University of Alberta, the thoughts of the limitations of such efforts are on our minds daily. For example, we tried to implement practices such as paying graduate students honoraria for teaching workshops through the center, and were quickly faced with the bureaucratic rules of the university, which define who can get paid under what circumstances. There's also the challenge of providing that access that we talk about, where students come to us and want to use our computing space, and they want software that they economically cannot afford themselves, but then library budgets constrain our ability to provide everybody with what they want. That being said, we are beginning to dedicate one full PD day to our per term as staff to discussing topics like queer theory, theories of learning, research methods, and Indigenous feminism in order to participate more deeply in the scholarly environment. Next slide. So I'll talk a little bit about our current programming models. Next slide. So the workshops that our first term in operation, we offered workshops in the fall of 2019. And if you can forward arrow, there's some things that are going to appear here. We offered streams. So we decided to offer our programming in stream format, and we offered Digital Scholarship 101. The instructors of these 2-hour workshops were from our staff and also from the university community. If you can forward arrow, there's another group. We also offered makerspace workshops that were primarily intended for teaching students policies and safety in the use of the makerspace, and that was facilitated by Jessica Thorlix and our colleague, and myself. I did the laser cutter and cutting workshops. And I think I already mentioned that Digital Humanities 101 all the workshops were 2 hours. And if you forward arrow twice, you'll see some of the promotional materials that we produced for that series. Moving forward, In winter 2020, I should note that our term was interrupted. The University of Alberta closed most of the facilities in mid-March, but we did start to offer Digital Humanities 101 again and added to our makerspace offerings. If you forward arrow, we also expanded our streams to include a series on research communication. And the grade course or workshops that you see there are ones that are currently in the planning stages. So these are planning to be added to these streams as we move forward. Next slide. So we have done an extensive amount of data gathering, but in the interest of time, I'm not going to go forward or into too much detail, but you'll be able to see them in the slides. We did have in the fall term 145 participants, 12 distinct workshops. So there were about 70, there were a couple of them were repeats of the makerspace workshops. Our winter term was starting to look very promising. By the time of our closure, we had offered 10 distinct workshops and quite a few makerspace workshops. As you can see, 21 had been delivered with 137 participants. We had 229 people registered in our non-makerspace workshops at this point. And on the right, you can see the level of participants by percentage. Next slide, please. And so this is a very quick glance at the different faculties and departments of attendees. As you can see, and it looks like Lydia is saying something here. I'll attend to that in a minute. I'm just going to continue because of time. So, so basically the humanities and social sciences has shown a very strong and steady interest in the workshops. We did see an increase in science and health sciences. Moving forward, I don't want to get into too much detail. All of the details are in the notes, so we can share our slides. We do feedback, a feedback form with our participants, and these are the questions that we ask them. A lot of open-ended questions so that we can get a lot of feedback from students that they can just openly put into the form for us. And if you move forward, you'll see the results showed an overwhelming approval for our programming and a lot of interest in future programming. The general feedback from the open-ended questions indicated that participants wanted more hands-on, more time, and more resources for further learning. Moving forward, onto our future considerations. Next slide. So thinking about the future, scaffolding is this idea that we're thinking of as addressing this issue with the different types of learners and levels of curricula that we're offering. We are considering how to move from basic workshops to helping users continue their learning. Like, how do we get from audio recording basics to academic podcasting? How do we get from developing a research comms plan to knowledge mobilization through multimedia? We are toying with the idea of implementing prerequisites or rules for those who can attend the workshops to keep work manageable, but also to ensure participants are exposed to the concept and the tool, as we have spoken, we feel is really important. Some of these pre-assessment ideas that have been presented earlier in the webinar today are actually quite interesting, and we'll be interested in looking at those, I'm sure. Moving forward. I only have a few minutes here. So another thing that we're looking at doing is inserting more problem-based activities into our workshops, tying technology learning to greater social and global issues, such as using critical making, and maybe offering more than just intros to tools in the makerspace. If you click to the next slide, the last slide, actually, second last, we are also interested in maybe starting a community of data physicalization. For those who don't know what that is, that's when you take data and you manifest it into an object, typically through textiles or yarn craft. It can be done through electronics and maybe potentially through some makerspace tools. Currently, during this COVID-19 crisis, we've recruited some of our librarian colleagues, and we are doing a data-driven knitting project of COVID-19 case numbers by province. So each one of us is knitting a strip of case numbers per province, and then we're going to make a blanket once this crisis is over. So this is a test run of this concept, and we're thinking of maybe doing something like that with the broader community. So that is all in terms of our presentation, but there's definitely going to be details about the statistics and stuff in our slides.
Thank you, Hannah and Lydia. So we've got a few minutes to go through the questions. Let's see. I think the first question, and this was to the first panel, will you do any follow-up focus groups or interviews to better understand how to meet the needs of graduate students, particularly in the sciences / health sciences?
Yeah, this is Stacy. I think that is something that we need to do, you know, when we get back, when we get back on campus, whenever that happens, because it was easier. It was definitely easier for us to meet the expectations of people, you know, in the social sciences and in the humanities. So we need to, first of all, know what people who are studying in graduate programs in the sciences and health sciences. We need to do better about finding out what they need, and then finding a way to meet that need. So for example, if our small department isn't able to provide the training that they need, you know, we might need to go outside of our department to another department somewhere on campus and see if maybe someone else can provide that training. We definitely don't need the training in the library to come from librarians. So that's one idea that I have in mind for the future for meeting those science and health science major needs. Thanks for the question.
Thanks. I'm just gonna skip just to provide a question for each of the panelists. Are you able to, this is for Kent, are you able to share syllabi for the curriculum? And then the person wrote, inspiring work, thank you.
Thank you. I just put a link to the lesson plan in the chat if people want to look at it.
Cool, great. Let me see. So it looks like there was a question about the terminology of using digital scholarship 101 versus digital humanities 101. Lydia did comment about that, but I don't know if there's something else that Hannah or Lydia want to say about that.
I use them interchangeably mistakenly. I'm really sorry about that. It is Digital Scholarship 101. It's just internally sometimes it's been called Digital Humanities.
Okay, thank you. And another question, and I guess this could go for all of the presenters. Are you thinking about what you can offer online in terms of workshops given our current circumstances? Are some topics more feasible to deliver online?
This is Amy. I'll jump in. We have managed to transition actually all of our currently offered workshops online. We do, of course, lose a pretty significant piece of the interactivity and some of the hands-on component. But at the same time, I do think it's nice that these are recorded and then the the participants can go back and look on it, and then, you know, some of the things that we walk them through step by step, they can pull up the recording and move alongside with that. It's a little bit more challenging to, for example, teach like an Omeka workshop online than it would be to teach, you know, something on like, you know, using copyright in the digital scholarship world. But for the most part, we have had some success with transitioning those online.
Does anyone else want to comment? Any of the other panelists?
I'll just say briefly, I think much of the lesson could be taught online. Sometimes it's harder to have the meaningful conversation or the sensitive conversation at a distance, but certainly it could be done. Yeah, I was fortunate enough that it was this spring, so I got to get it in before we also had to leave campus, but it could be done that way for sure.
Okay. There was a question about whether there's going to be a recording, and this is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be sent to all the registrants in a few days. ACRL is taking care of that for us. So we are a little bit over time, so I want to be cognizant of everyone's time. I want to thank all of our panelists for providing such interesting and motivating information on ways of doing digital scholarship. And I want to thank all the attendees as well, and stay healthy. And I hope that, you know, our current situation will go away soon. Thank you everyone for attending. I really appreciate it.